This podcast is a proud member of the Unidentified Network.
On the Track is a monthly web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues, and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
Well, Hennis, in this week's episode, Richard Freeman and Alan Freeman, no relation, look at the bottom 10, the cryptids least likely to exist.
I really like the old credits.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jon Downes. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and this is Peanut of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, Cat, and welcome to another episode of Hang On, what's going over there? Goodness me, is it the arrival of the chicken chorus? What would you do if the chickens start to shout? Would you laugh and wave your arms about? What would you do if the chickens all made a lot of noise? Would you join in with the fun or be good little girls and boys? Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's try again. That was a rare treat, though. I love the chicken chorus. You can't go wrong with a bunch of chickens singing a silly song. Life doesn't get better than this. Okay, try again. My name's Jon Downes. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology. This is Captain Peanut Phrenobulax the Magnificent, one of the most important, if not the most important, according to him, of the CFZ cats. And welcome to another episode of On the Track. For those of you who don't know, On the Track is a show that we do twice a week, every Wednesday evening at 6:30 for about half an hour, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about twice that. We bring you a mélange, a mixture, a montage, a merryweather. No, that doesn't work. Lauren, what begins with M?
Minnow, of course.
Thank you, Lauren. I can work with that. We bring you a minnow of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality? Well, you've seen the show so far. That's pretty surreal, but cop a load of this. Look in the mirror of your own mind. Now, before we go any further, I do want to apologise. We are very aware that in the last few episodes, and probably in this episode, there are glitches and there are bits when the sound goes out of sync with the pictures. We are doing our best to fix this. Let me tell you what happened. I updated the software that we use for recording at the same time as Windows 10 did an update. And ever since then, either it is the software that we're using to record or the software we're using to edit isn't working properly. Louis and I are doing our best to fix it. But we've made the decision that any show is better than no show at all, and so we've decided to carry on rather than go on indefinite hiatus while we try to resolve the problems. I hope. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that what we're now going to do doesn't come over as too contrived. But earlier in the year, I think it was earlier this year, we did a 4-part show with Richard Freeman in which he went through his 10 creatures, cryptozoological creatures he thought were most likely to exist. I've had people asking me since, what about the creatures we think are least likely to exist? And this brought back memories of a game that Richard and I used to play back when we shared a house in Exeter many moons ago. And this is the sort of thing we'd sit down and make lists of what's your top 10 African cryptids, or what's the top 10 cryptids least likely to exist. And we're going to do that again today. And is it because, as somebody, I think it was Mr. Biffo, told me once, that shows which are apparently known in the contemporary Argot's the poisoning
you get from
fungus
bread,
that they make LSD out of. Ergot as listicles are very, very popular. So let's do a listicle and see what the what the algorithm at YouTube thinks of it. So,
greetings, Cryptid Podcast Pickers. Fluff here with Rich Freeman's No Relation. Top 10 least likely to exist supposed cryptozoological animals. Here we go. Creeping in at number 10, it's the non-avian dinosaurs.
Number 10 is non-avian dinosaurs, such as Mbembe and its analogues. There is absolutely no evidence that any dinosaurs other than birds survived the KT extinction event. There's nothing in the fossil record to suggest that. And if you look at the stories of Mbembe from the Congo and the waterways of Central Africa, people in the past have thought that this refers to a sauropod dinosaur, but it refers to an animal that lives almost its whole life wallowing in water. Dinosaurs didn't do that. Back in Victorian times, it was thought that sauropod dinosaurs, the large, long-necked, long-tailed plant eaters, lived in water to support their great weight. And there's a burgeoning amount of evidence now to suggest that the largest sauropods were even bigger than the blue whale, and second only to the giant ichthyosaur Ichthyotitan sevenensis, which was recently discovered and may be upper estimates say that maybe it weighed 300 tons, this giant ichthyosaur, but there seems to be evidence of giant sauropods upwards of 200 tons. But they didn't live in water. They lived in dry land in herds like elephants or giraffes. And the main reason they didn't live in water is they've got these great long necks, and if they were submerged in water with just the top of their head sticking out of the water, in order to suck air into their lungs, it'd have to go along 40 feet of neck, and the pressure would collapse their lungs. And also their teeth were not designed for soft water plants, they were for stripping away fibrous land plants, which they processed with a gizzard, which had gastroliths, stones that they swallowed, that they used in the same way that a bird uses its gizzard to crush them to a pulp to make them more digestible. Everything about them suggests that they were land-dwelling animals. The fossils are from are not from riverine biotopes, except when they've been swept away by a flood. So sauropod dinosaurs were land dwellers, and it doesn't fit well with Mbembe at all, and what Mbembe behaves like. And if you look closely at Mokele Mbembe, it seems to be more folkloric than anything flesh and blood.
If it was flesh and blood, if there was a large flesh and blood semi-aquatic or mostly aquatic creature living in Lake Tele, what would you think it was?
A huge monitor lizard, a huge long-necked monitor lizard, similar in form to the Nile monitor, maybe 30 feet long. Some of the sightings from a distance may involve huge soft-shelled turtles, which can get to 6 feet across their carapace. But the Mokele Mbembe is supposed to have a long whip-like tail as well, which makes it sound like a monitor to me, if it's real.
And it's also got confused with, is it a melantoca?
A melanatoca, which is this other creature which has a horn, and it's supposed to kill hippos and elephants with this great horn. It's a four-legged creature with a great horn, and some people have suggested it's a ceratopsian dinosaur. If that exists, it's more likely to be some sort of form of rhino. Whether it's a known species of rhino outside of its known range, or an unknown species of rhino, maybe one more adapted to a marshy environment, we don't know. But it's not a ceratopsian dinosaur.
And the Asian rhinos are, to a greater or lesser extent, semi-aquatic, aren't they?
Yes, the great Indian rhino spends a lot of time in water.
And the Javan rhino.
Yes, yeah.
The ones that were rediscovered back in the 80s in Vietnam, which are now sadly extirpated, they were found in rivers.
Yeah, and then on New Guinea, or rather New Britain, well, New Britain and New Guinea, there are stories of these giant reptiles that rear up on their hind legs. There was one about 10 or 15 years ago from New Britain that everyone said was a dinosaur, and it was supposed to have been this huge lizard-like animal that reared up on its hind legs and killed dogs and sent the area into a panic. And for some reason people thought it was an iguanodon, which makes no sense whatsoever. Iguanodon was a herbivore, and it was only a semi-biped, and it didn't live anywhere near New Guinea, and it's been extinct for over 100 million years.
Yeah, but apart from that, Richard, you're obviously trying to suppress the truth, that these people know the truth, and you're just suppressing it because you're a tool of the establishment.
They're more likely to be giant monitor lizards. We know that the Salvadori dragon, sometimes called the crocodile monitor, from New Guinea can get to 15 feet long. It's the longest lizard, not the bulkiest. The Komodo dragon is the bulkiest known. But there are stories of gigantic specimens of monitor lizards from New Guinea that are between 20 to 30 feet long. And they're known to rear up on their hind legs, and where they would look superficially like a flesh-eating dinosaur. So I think that's what we've got there. It's not a Tyrannosaurus rex, it's a very large monitor lizard.
Okay, well that was at number 10, which, although you have, I think, satisfactorily shown that these things don't exist and never have existed, or not for many, many, many tens of millions of years, as we go further up the list, some of these are going to get more and more and more absurd and less likely.
Greetings, Cryptid Podcast Pickers. Fluff here with Rich Freeman's No Relation. Top 10 least likely to exist supposed cryptozoological animals. Here we go. Walking into number 9, we have the British Bigfoot.
So what we got at number 9, Rich?
British Bigfoot. God, what a load of cobblers.
Dum, dum, dum.
The idea that there is a population, and you need a population, not just one, and the idea there's a population of 7 to 8 foot relic hominins living in Britain is patently absurd and non-workable. Britain is one of the most deforested countries in Europe. A lot of the forests we do have are rather biologically barren conifer plantations. Most of our evergreen forests have been lost, and there's simply just not enough room to support or hide a population of creatures like this in Britain. It's impossible.
I think that in a minute we're going to go on to the subject of the woodwoes, which is something which has existed in British folklore for centuries, and although I've always been very sceptical about them, I've actually seen one, so I can't ignore the fact that they do exist. But I think the interesting thing is that interest in the British Bigfoot and the term the British Bigfoot has got more and more popular, commensal with the rising popularity of the various Bigfoot-related North American satellite TV shows. And I think that that has given a load of people, especially young people, Bigfoot mania, and they go out and, like Captain Ahab, they smell land where there is no land. But woodroses certainly do exist. They've got nothing to do with Bigfoot. Bigfoot is, I think the term Bigfoot was invented by Ray Wallace, wasn't it? And he was a hoaxer himself. But the woodrose, the European wild man, has been reported for as long as there have been reports. The father of taxonomy, Carl von Linné, better known as Linnaeus, he believed in them and called it Homo ferox. We were Homo sapiens, the thinking man, and Homo ferox, the woodrose, was the wild man. What do you think about these things?
Well, the definition of these in medieval bestiaries was that they weren't meant to be a separate species to human beings. They were human beings that had been ostracised from the love of God, because you've got to remember that medieval bestiaries were all about Christianity and the lessons that Christians could learn from various creatures. So it wasn't so much about the natural history of the creatures itself. It was, like religion always does, control through fear. And because they were ostracised from the love of God, they lived not in towns and cities, but in forests, and they became covered with hair to protect themselves from the cold. So they weren't meant to be like relic hominins or mysterious apes. They were just wild people.
The thing that I saw at Bowden Lake, and I've talked about this on a number of occasions, and no doubt we'll talk about it again, but not today, could not have existed using purely zoological terms of reference. And you and I have talked again quite widely about how some things, and I hate the word paranormal and I hate the word supernatural, because I think these things are normal and are natural. They are just defined by laws of science that we don't understand yet. And like dear sweet Tony Shields said to me once, I don't know why you fucking 14s get so fucking worked up about this. It's just stuff. It's the way the universe works, so fucking get used to it. And I believe that he was right. That these things are part of the mechanism that makes the universe work.
Well, in my new book, The Highest Strangeness, available from CFZ Press, there's a whole section about British Bigfoot, a creature that can't possibly be a real flesh and blood animal, but it looks into what might actually be happening and causing these sightings, along with many other strange things. So, stop watching this, get out and buy it.
No, carry on watching this And when it's over, or when this episode is over, because this is going to be run over several episodes, get your credit cards out and buy it. But what I was wondering, and this is something I have been thinking more and more about, what do you think the chances are of these alien animals, to use Janet Board's very good term, leaving physical traces in this world?
Yes, again, I talk about this in my book. They can leave physical traces. They can leave tracks. They can attack livestock. They can physically interact with the world around them.
So, if they can physically interact with the world around them during whatever period of time it is that they are in this dimension, in this world. When I say in this world, I don't think that they come from the planet Zog at the other end of the universe. I think they come from this planet, but in a different reality or a different dimension. But that's something we need to discuss in much greater depth at some time in the future. And I'm hoping to be able to get a quantum scientist on to talk about the reasons behind the idea that there are so many dimensions and how things could cross from one dimension to another. But that's another subject. If they can interact with this dimension, and could that mean, could they leave traces of themselves? Could that explain the strange occurrences like Daniel Barnett's DNA?
Possibly, but I'm more inclined to think that came off the boots of somebody who had been at a zoo.
Well, it couldn't have come off a what's the word? It couldn't have come off a punter at the zoo because of the biosecurity rules that they have in zoos now, whereas where you're not going to get anywhere near primate dung, primate droppings.
Don't you believe it?
I know.
Chimpanzees throw shit.
So politicians, we still take the piss out of them on this show. But I'm just wondering whether, theoretically, something could have come from another generation, left its DNA behind and buggered off again.
Possibly, but I still think it's more likely, more parsimonious, that it was something from a zoo.
I think it's more likely to have been something from this dimension, but it is a concept that I think we shouldn't totally...
Poo-poo.
Yeah, I think it's a possibility that we ought to explore more. And especially for some... Cryptozoology is full, the cryptozoological community is full of warring factions who all hate each other. I think it's because quite a lot of the people involved in cryptozoology are fairly extreme people, extreme personalities. And I think that because they are fairly extreme personalities, they end up being more likely to get upset or angry or pissed off with their fellow cryptozoologists and then start wars of shouting at each other on the internet. This is particularly so in Bigfoot research, and even more so in British Bigfoot research, which is why we are in the process of starting the CFZ Woodworth project, where hopefully we will be able to get people from all the different branches of thought who study British Bigfoot, which I hate the term, but we're still stuck with it at the moment, people who study woodworthers, to be able to explain exactly what it is they believe. And so the whole thing can be, so these things can be peer reviewed in the proper sense of the word, not peer-reviewed by people who are going to obviously poo-poo anything to do with the subject, but peer-reviewed being reviewed by their peers, so we can actually see what it is that people believe and how it is that these beliefs could be or could not be true. So that was a nice controversial one. On to number 8, Richie Poos.
Greetings, Cryptid Podcast Pickers. Fluff here with Rich Freeman's No Relation Top 10 Least Likely to Exist Supposed Cryptozoological Animals. Here we go. Hunting into the number 8 spot, it's the indigenous British big cat.
Number 8.
Number 8, staying in the UK, an indigenous species of UK big cat. Now this was first touted by a woman called Di Francis in a book called Cat Country, and she thought that the sightings of British big cats were not escaped exotics or the descendants of escaped exotics, but a creature unknown to science that had always been here from the year dot, since time immemorial, and it was a unique species, native to Britain and nowhere else. And her evidence for this was absolutely nothing. One of the things she used to say is that it's got a graded paw, in that the toes were all different sizes, the different grade of size, and that was just because the prints she'd seen were not complete prints. They weren't very good prints that made the toes look like they were going down in size. And she wasn't a very good tracker, she wasn't a very good zoologist. Everybody else completely poo-poos the idea of an indigenous big cat. There are big cats in Britain, I've seen one and I've seen a kill by one, but these are melanistic leopards, pumas, lynx and other things like jungle cats that have escaped from captivity and in some cases bred. But there is not a unknown, unidentified indigenous British big cat. For one thing, it would turn up in folklore, it'd be all over folklore, and it isn't. And Di Francis tried to say that the stories of demonic black dogs like Black Shuck and the Bargest and Padfoot and things like that are found in every county over Britain, that these were in fact big black cats and not big black dogs. Well, no they weren't, because if you bother to look at these actual stories, they are paranormal in nature, they're more ghost-like than flesh and blood, and they're nothing like a cat.
Now I knew Di Francis. She's dead now, God bless her, and she's one of the very controversial people that, again, going back to the tendency for cryptozoology communities to hate each other, she was somebody you either loved or hated, and most people hated. I thought she was really nice. As a person, I had great fun with her. It's a lovely lady. And we published a novel by her about British big cats that absolutely nobody bought. But I agree with Richard. I think that her evidence that she put up was frankly risible. She presented one piece of evidence at a conference that I was at best part of 20 years ago. I'm pretty sure it was even before I got married, so about 18 years ago. Karina and I were there. Yeah, I think it was before I got married. I think it was 2006. It was, after my father died. And she presented her latest bit of evidence. She swore us all to secrecy and said we weren't allowed to go live with it. Well, it's 20 years on, and she's dead. And I believe that Darren Naish has rubbished the story on his blog. I know that other people have talked about it, so I'm going to go public now. I might even have the picture still somewhere, but I'm not that sure. She had a photograph of a flat-faced cat. She was convinced that these mystery cats of Britain, this indigenous species, had a flat face, a bit like a bulldog or a... Give me one of those cats, Richard, with the flat faces.
Oh, the Persian cat.
Persians. And she had a photograph of a dead cat with a flat face on a beach in Scotland. And it was lying on a bed of bladderwrack, which, as you know, as I expect you know, is a type of seaweed with air bladders that help it remain buoyant. You've seen this pic, haven't you, Richard?
Yes.
Yeah. And she, by doing the mathematics, and she got somebody else, luckily the person she got to count up all the bladders on the seaweed in the photograph was somebody I totally disliked. I'm not going to mention his name, but somebody I totally disliked, and the fact that he spent hours counting up the bladders in the seaweed and then going to look at how big the bladders were on seaweed, on bladderwrack, and then from this managed to extrapolate that the cat was 9 feet in length. Well, it wasn't. There are many different species of bladderwrack, some with big bladders and some with small bladders. And I couldn't be bothered to count up all the pictures, all the different bladder sizes, but this cat was a tortoiseshell. It was a tortoiseshell. Is Dottie in here?
No, she's not.
A tortoiseshell, which is what our transatlantic chums called a calico cat. It was a dead calico cat with Persian ancestry on a beach that had got washed up. Probably because it fell off a boat or something in the North Sea, and it happened to wind up on a bed of relatively small bladderwrack, and I'm afraid that's the end of that story. She also jumped at another photograph that was presented by another friend of ours, no names, no pack drill, which showed a decomposed dead animal with a flattened face. What it didn't show, although I am assured by the person who took the photograph that it was there, it just didn't turn up in the picture. What it didn't show was the collar it was wearing. It was a boxer dog of some description, which, like the bloody monster, which I think we'll be talking about later on, had lost all its hair as part of decomposition. She was convinced this was another one of those mystery cats. Richard, Cat Country again. She wrote 3 books. The first one, Cat Country, I really liked at the time when I was in my early 20s, until over the next 10 years or so the scales fell from my eyes and I realised that it was mostly nonsense. The second one, The Beast of Exmoor, I found seriously irritating and actually quite offensive when it was claiming that one of the notorious missing child cases, that of Jeanette Tate of Rockbeer in Devon, I think it was Rockbeer, it was somewhere around there,
it was Rockbeer,
who disappeared while out on a paper round, had been eaten by a big cat. No, she hadn't. She was taken and probably murdered by a child molester, probably that guy Black. His name, I can't remember his first name. Robert Black? Robert Black. Yeah. Almost certainly him, who was there at the same time. But this book claimed much to the upset of the people of the area, because I was at school with Jeanette Tate's best friend's brother, and I knew people who knew her, and the soul, the pain of that incident is still there, and it was very much still there in the late 1980s, early 1990s when this book was published. And to claim that she was eaten by a big cat, especially as the book was called The Beast of Exmoor and this was nowhere near Exmoor, is, I'm afraid, I think totally offensive. And then she did the third book, which was about the Kellis cats, but that's
different kettle of fish.
Kettle of coelacanths, I think, if we're going to be allowed. Totally different kettle of coelacanths, and we will talk about them on another occasion. And like I said, I liked her. I thought she was a very, very nice person, and I enjoyed her company. I just didn't really have a very high opinion of her as a field zoologist. But now we've demolished that. That was number 8, wasn't it, Rich?
Mm-hmm.
Number 7. What's at number 7? Well, you're going to have to wait until next week to find out. But in the meantime, this happens.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, says, don't forget to ring the notification bell, otherwise you'll miss the new episodes. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
If you've been affected by any of the topics in today's episode, you can just bugger off, because we don't give a monkeys. Bloody well get a grip. Sort your own bloody problems out rather than ringing up somewhere.
That was a public information film.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. You don't know how much your support means to me. I mean that, truly. I want to say a big thank you to my guest this week, who's been Richard Freeman, and to my producer, Louis, and to V. McCrinnan, but for whom I wouldn't be able to do what I do on this show. And I want to say a big, big thank you to Graham Inglis, my carer and the Deputy Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology. And I want to say a big, big thank you to the lovely Gwyn Palmer, Assistant Director of the CFZ, who does so much now with the CFZ administration, the books and everything else, that I really, truly couldn't manage it without her. Many thanks, love, and I do hope that you know how much you're appreciated. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be back on Wednesday. What am I talking about on Wednesday? Well, I can tell you for once. It's a collection of odds and sods catching up from the last few weeks or months' shows, and it's got some very interesting stuff in it, including the complete footage taken of the pine marten in Clovelly a few months ago. And I'll be back next Saturday. And what am I talking about next Saturday? Well, it's going to be the second part of the show we've just watched, whereas Richard Freeman goes through his top 10 cryptozoological creatures least likely to exist, or as I call it, the bottom 10, because that just makes me snigger. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be back on Wednesday. What am I talking about on Wednesday? Well, I can tell you for once. It's a collection of odds and sods catching up from the last few weeks or months' shows, and it's got some very interesting stuff in it, including the complete footage taken of the pine marten in Clovelly a few months ago. And I'll be back next Saturday. And what am I talking about next Saturday? Well, it's going to be the second part of the show we've just watched, whereas Richard Freeman goes through his top 10 cryptozoological creatures least likely to exist, or as I call it, the bottom 10, because that just makes me snigger. And so, do you think V. McCrinnan is going to be there watching next weekend?
I think he will be.
Well, I hope he will be, because it'll be letting me and Miss Isabel down if you weren't there, Mr. McCrinnan. And so, assuming you're there watching, and me and Miss Isabel are doing what we do, then, Mr. McCrinnan and everybody else, I'll be seeing you